Welcome, everybody, to the Seattle Sports KIRO710 podcast. My name is Abraham DeWeese. I'm back again with the Soulman, Brian Solack. And today we have a very special guest in Stacy Jo Rost. She is from KIRO710. She's on Bump and Stacy in the morning from 11 to 2. And it's great to have you here today. And Brian and I had a debate about your name, Stacy.
Yes. Will you clear up your last name, the controversy for your last name?
It's
please.
It's Rost. It's like frost without the F.
Okay. Because we've seen Ross, Rost, Roast, Roost. I don't know. We've seen every permutation of that. And we've also seen Stacy Jo, Stacy, this, that, and the other thing, and we were debating it this afternoon before the show. And it's great that we finally got it. So it's Rost like Frost, but not like Scott Frost, who just got kicked out of Nebraska. You're staying on this show at least for a good hour.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for clearing that up. We want to cover with you, again, you're on 710 KIRO, Seattle Sports, and you're making a name for yourself. You're doing quite well. We got you right there for lunchtime. Listen to you every day, and it's great to have you in the show. And I just want to know, with Jake Heaps and now with Michael Bumpus, is this where you thought you were going to be a decade ago when you're back in college? I mean, you're in a job which I think is a dream job for me and Brian.
Yeah.
But you seem to got it, and you seem to you have everything it takes, and you got there. Was this a drive of yours from the get-go, or is this something else that happened?
Not this necessarily. So a decade ago, wow, I was going to say I was in college, but it's now been more than a decade. I've never felt older than in this moment. But I initially, when I was in college, I went to be a writer because it was just what I was good at in high school. So I was like, oh, I'll be a writer, easy, right? And for some reason, my mom wasn't like, be a doctor. She was like, great, have fun. So I went there and majored in English and hated it. And so then instead of just switching majors, just picked up another one because I'd gone too far, and got really, really into, they have this major there called Law, Societies, and Justice, which is like political science, and you can go into a couple different fields, right? And so I was really interested in going to law school, and I loved constitutional law in particular, and that was my area of focus. And so I was like determined. I was like, I'm going to be a lawyer. This is what I'm going to do. So I interned for a lawyer when I left, and it just is a bunch of paperwork. And I was like, this isn't the movie I thought it was. So I realized that if I could have a job that was doing my homework for these classes all the time, I would, but that's obviously not the gig. So I knew I still loved writing, and got a job not in sports, but then eventually in sports radio doing digital stuff. So I kind of transitioned to I'll be a reporter. I like sports, I'll cover it. And that was initially my job with Bonneville. I never thought I'll be a radio host. I didn't see myself reflected in that crowd per se. And it was just I'll cover sports and do this. And then, gradually you just kind of transition to on air in the weirdest way.
That kind of answers my next question. I mean, a lawyer from UW, I mean, that's quite impressive. And where you could be out cleaning up the world, yet you decide to talk sports in a sports town.
Exactly.
I mean, I know which route I would go, but
I was like, man, I could really get into human rights law, or I could talk about Russell Wilson's contract, and one of them is just so much more fulfilling for me. So I took the sports route.
Outstanding. Who was your influence for going into broadcasting? Did you have one growing up?
You know what? I loved Dan Patrick. I used to listen to his show a ton, not necessarily growing up. This was more as a young adult. But I wasn't big into sports when I was little. Though I did make believe frequently that I was I was still outgoing. So it makes sense looking back, even though I didn't have broadcast idols that I liked. But as I got into college, especially, I've always loved Dan Patrick. I don't know, just conversational, relaxed, which isn't necessarily my style at all. But I loved that aspect of sports radio that's not necessarily that East Coast in your face, although that's so entertaining to me. Like it's I still get a kick out of it, but I love the idea of, it's kind of like what initially like blossomed into podcast culture almost, was like, I want to feel like I'm sitting with people I know. Like, yes, I want to be entertained, but I want to feel like I'm listening to people and I'm almost part of the conversation. Like I'm there in the room with them. And that was a kind of sports radio that felt newer, and I really liked it. So I think that's probably one of them.
Right on.
Yeah.
Stacy, when you first got on my radar, it was when you were with Jake Heaps, and now you work with Michael Bumpus. Former quarterback, former wide receiver, both, dabbled in
Divas.
the NFL. I'm sorry?
I said both divas. Huge
true.
divas.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. That's where I was going with this. I feel okay. Well, if we're going to be honest, Ben, I feel like sometimes you wrangle them in, and I'm curious, what's the difference between the two of them? What do you do differently, as a broadcaster or as a radio personality, with Jake, and differently with Michael?
That's such a good question. This is the type of radio that I love talking about, because I do love talking about how I got involved, but like some of the intricacies of radio are like, hey, as a lead, how do you work with this analyst versus this analyst? Because you have to be aware of, when you're leading the show, who someone is at his or her very best, or their very best. And Jake and Bump at their very best, you have to take different approaches with them. And it's one of those things that, like, man, credit to Mike Salk and Bob Stelton, who are both able to do the same and don't get nearly enough credit for doing that too. It's tough to do. But with so with Jake is very outgoing. He's very he can get fired up very easily. So I felt that Jake was at his best when he was getting really fired up, and but could still articulate his thoughts. So I'd try to get him fired up about things that he was very familiar with.
Oh, so you'd
so
poke
that he
and
didn't
prod.
Yeah, so that you don't want, because with Jake, he was also like me, where we were new. Like Bump came in with experience, whereas Jake and I started pretty, like raw as far as broadcasting goes. And so if I wanted to get him fired up, to avoid him talking in circles or, putting his foot in his mouth accidentally, I had to make sure it was about something he was very familiar with, so that people could see, like, oh, this guy's really smart. Like, he would always get people being like, oh, you're just saying whatever Russ wants you to say. And it's like, man, you think Jake doesn't care about stuff that a quarterback would care about? Like, he's so passionate about types of offenses that he cares about, and about, what I mean? Like, what matters for different teams and how different teams are built. Like, those are things he really cares about. And so I would try to tap into those. I found that it was also good to rib Jake. Like, he is kind of like that, perfect kind of, it's like Brock, where you're like, this person becomes more relatable to people when you kind of make fun of them. And so we would make fun of him misusing idioms a ton. Like, I found that it made him really likable to people when they were like, I'm in on the joke about Jake. And Jake, like, I feel so bad that he's gotten so much like random hate from some Seahawks fans now and from Broncos fans, because he is the most easygoing guy. Like, he is, I mean, one of the kindest people I've worked with. With Bump, it's kind of the opposite. I think he's at his best when he's being very candid about bigger conversations. And so some of my favorite conversations with Bump are setting him up for a philosophical conversation about, like, well, why does this matter for players? Or why sometimes do we forget that players are people, or things like that. I find that he's great. He's also wonderful with callers, so I try to set him up with callers. But yeah, you just find out. That was such a long-winded answer. I'm so sorry, but I love this question because it's about kind of the intricacies of hosting, which is you find out what your analyst or your second chair, which is the analyst role, is good at, and when they're at their best. Like, no one's tuning in to be like, what's Stacy think? I mean, if they do, great, but like, when people are tuning in to hear a former player, they want to know, like, what's this guy think? I want to know how he sees it. You need to make sure that, like, you're setting them up for success. It's not about you, even though, you can kind of be self-deprecating. Like, how do you get them to be their best self? So I love doing it.
Awesome. Do you ever hold it against Bumpus because he's a Coug?
all the time. All the time, every day. No, he's banned me. So I love saying "Go Cougs," and it just flows. I just like the way it sounds, and he's limited to where I can only say it once a month. But I say it much. I break the rule all the time.
That's awesome.
How much does that come into play? You know, the playfulness, the banter. Because I say this because both Brian and I listen to your show. We know, but you know, just for our listeners out there who don't have yet to listen to your show, that really comes across. Like I think there's a connection. And how much of that is cultivated through work, and how much is it just chemistry?
I think a good portion of it is chemistry. I think it's really hard to fake chemistry. I happen to get along really well with Jake. And with Bump, we get along really well. He's a little bit older. So Jake was a little younger than me. Bump is a little older. And he's kind of got this like older brother vibe where like he'll joke about like my dating stories and kind of like make fun of me, and then I'll rib him back. And it's very natural. But a big part of it too is like, man, shout out to Curtis, who is one of my very best friends. And he's the only producer who's ever produced me. And he's also a host, and he's wonderful. And he is really, really, like, you want to talk about finding out what makes people good at their jobs and how to poke people and prod. So much of that chemistry is Curtis being like, you know, kind of being like, well, why don't you talk about this? You guys should talk about this next segment. Just do it. Who cares?
Right,
and so,
Crabtree,
yeah.
right?
No, that's Rogers, Curtis Rogers.
Curtis Rogers, sorry. Okay,
Curtis Rogers, yeah. Curtis Crabtree is wonderful. He's a friend. But yeah, I mean, it helps being friends, like similar ages, similar experiences. You know, we're on a group thread right now talking about the Mariners game. So I think I will say what you hear on air is the very family-friendly version of probably how we are.
And I just realized Curtis Crabtree's on the wrong station. I don't know why I said his name. My apologies. Curtis Rogers, yes. Question for you, because you're not just in the scope of radio. I mean, in the past, you've done digital media, and that's actually what got you into radio from what I understand. But you also, I've seen you as I go to Seahawks games at the convention center, and you host a show there. How did you get to hosting that with G Scott? So that's that come about?
That is 1,000% G, who has been a really, really great mentor. He was doing the pregame shows, and at the time was doing some sports stuff, and then transitioning to KIRO because he wanted to do news work. And so he started out on KIRO nights, and because we were already friends, I would jump on with him and his then co-host Zach, and we just could talk about almost anything, and we would frequently talk about sports, and frequently during the season talk about the Seahawks. And then he said, you know what, I'm going to reach out to Abby, who's the producer for she's moved on, but who was the producer for that pregame show, and he had been doing it for, at the time, like 16 seasons, and so had a lot of sway. And he was like, hey, I'm telling you, this girl is great. Like, she's a newer host, but like she knows her stuff. Like, she can do the football X's and O's stuff. And that's how he was telling me, which was great. It wasn't like, oh, here we're going to bring in this woman and she's going to be like, gee, what you got? Like, I got to be the analyst, and I got to be the second chair.
Well, that's cool.
In the role where, you know, where on the show, G's kind of playing my role, which is that first chair lead host. And it's nice to be able to be the analyst in turn. And I loved that opportunity. And you still have to make it kind of, you know, we're not out there, you know, having a football podcast per se. Like, you still have to make it to where you're like, there's 5-year-olds in the audience, and there's diehard, you know, 45-year-old football fans. So how do I talk to both? So it's not like the most, you know, diehard fan analysis and analytics of football, but it's fun. So yeah, it's a blast. That is 1,000% G, and 1,000% just a lesson about, like, sometimes making friends with people who believe in you, really.
That is my follow-up question there, is how do you grasp the attention of an audience that's kind of just walking through? And, you know, this is more of a question for myself and Brian. You know, on the podcast, we can talk about what we want. People either listen or they don't, whatever. But when we're in an Aqua Sox game and we talk to people, it's like, Oh my God, please don't walk away. Please.
Yeah.
Please listen to
I
what we
hear
have to
you.
say.
There's
How do you
nothing worse.
how do you manage that?
Yeah, it's all, I will tell you, it's, as you guys I'm sure plenty familiar with, like, it's win and lose. There are some times where you're like, all right, not my day. Like, you feels like you're like a traveling salesperson where you're like, all right, didn't get anything today, but there's always tomorrow. I mean, especially at the in 20, God, was it 2021 when Russell was hurt? There was a period of time when at home games, it was just, the energy was just gone. Like, you could just tell, like, people were still excited to go to Seahawks games, but you could feel the difference between, oh my God, it's week 1, we're all so excited, and they're out of the playoffs. And not only that, but they don't have a first round pick, and now everyone's sad. So there are just days when you just don't get it. You'll try audience engagement, you'll try everything, and it just doesn't work. But I find that some of the best things to do are almost like performance. So G and I, now it's a bit different from what you guys would do, but for G and I, we almost have like a conversation aloud to each other where something is wrong. That's right. Automatic go-to. It's like a classic kind of like, something's wrong. What's wrong? And so like we had one where our biggest guest of the year was Steve Largent. And we don't just want to say, oh, Steve Largent's going to be here. So I pretended to be very upset because Abby promised me that we would get this really exciting guest. And I think it was like Rihanna had a concert. Like, I thought it would be Rihanna, and I was really, really sad. And so I'm pretending that I don't know the guest. And geez, who's the guest? Who's the guest? Well, why are you upset? Who's the guest? You know what I mean? So it gets people being like, well, who's the guest? And then I'm looking down, and it's just Steve Largent. I don't know, like, no one that matters. And it gets people in on the joke, and I keep mispronouncing the name. I'm like, Scott Lugnut is going to be joining us later today. And it's like a little sketch almost that is silly and stupid, and sometimes it completely bombs and you feel stupid, and other times it's like people that are kind of passing by or not paying attention kind of turn and they go like, it's hard to turn away from a performance even if it's bad,
Right.
so that's what we found, if the crowd gets a little thin or a little slow, or even on, sometimes on like a week 1 game we'll do stuff like that where it's you're almost doing like a sketch.
Right on. I gotta ask, I know you had a few jobs right after college before you got into 710. What did you prefer more, working at the mall or working at the zoo?
Oh God. Honestly, the zoo, after a while, they're both very similar. So, the mall was the worst because I worked at a like designer store. So we're wearing, the women are wearing like heels and dresses all day. Okay. So you want to talk about like a Black Friday where you're opening, going basically open to close, and you're wearing 4-inch heels, and you have people come in and you need to hit a sales quota. Like, I could never be in sales. I don't know about you guys. Like the thought of being like, you have to sell X amount every day, it just stresses me out. With the zoo, it was like, hey, after 2 p.m., no one shows up. No, the zoo's open until like, God, when I was there, it would be like 5:30 or so. No one's going to the zoo because they don't want to spend at the time like $30 a person to be there for a half hour. So the final 3 hours, you're like, I'm not doing anything. I'm like reading. You're listening to podcasts. It's great.
Nice.
Oh, I've worked retail. I know Solack you have as well. There was plenty of, I don't really believe in this product either. Just please buy it.
Right. Where you're like, look, I don't know what to tell you. Do you want it or not? I gotta go.
Hey, I'd like to move into Mariners if we could, because that's topical as of this season. And I've listened to some of the stuff. There's some of the questions I'm going to ask are based off of what you have talked about. So I know the answer, but I know everybody out there doesn't know, and we want to get your expertise on it, rather than just the ranting and ravings of 2 lunatics like me and the Soulman. So first of all, can you pick for me 1 or 2 of the new rules in baseball that you think are a good idea?
Oh yeah, I mean, all of them, but the pitch clock, or pitch timer rather, right? Because MLB doesn't want to have a clock. But the pitch timer, I think, is brilliant. Like, we all saw Karinchak pitching last year. God love him, but Diego Castillo is slow as well. Like, in spring training knocked off a good amount of time. I don't think we'll see, like, we talked with Larry Stone about this, who was like, I don't know that we'll see exactly the same time knocked off from games, but like, it does feel like games go more quickly. And I say that knowing Sunday's game was 3 hours or whatever into extras. I think, the bigger bases, I don't really like, it doesn't really do anything for me. I love the idea of just runners, trying to swipe bags more often. I wonder if pickoff attempts impacts that more than the base size, but that would probably be the second rule that I'm. Oh, and the shift. Hello, like, are we going to see a career year from Jared Kelnick? I mean, heck of a home run today.
He did. Tied it
Yeah,
up.
not that would have been.
Go. Well, so
Yeah.
okay, this is a counterpoint to the pitch clock. Will there be fewer beer sales at the
Great
stadium?
question. I mean, inevitably, yeah, right? Like, you want to talk about, I didn't think we'd get here, but there was someone who tweeted out the other day, like, they were complaining because the game was only 2 hours long. And they were like, I spent tickets for me and my family and at first I was like, are you kidding me? And I thought about it. And I was like, you know what? If I was a parent and I had 3 kids and I hauled them out to the game and, we're a family of 5 or 4 or whatever. Yeah, I'm looking for like, 2 hours and 30. Like, let's get a little
Right.
more juice out of this. So yeah, I totally think that's a possibility. Yeah, great question.
Opening day, I ran up to Kid Valley, long line. Over here, I look, hot dogs, long line. What is there?
Gone.
A beer vendor. I guess I'm eating beer today.
Yeah,
That's what's
exactly.
open. Yeah, no, those lines, I don't know if people are
Oh
going
my
to dig.
God.
I don't know if they're going to dig the shorter. Well, people will figure it out eventually, but I don't know if the management ownership is going to like that. That's going to dig into concession stands.
No. Well, and we wondered too, like, kind of privately, like in the sports pet, while we're planning, or, like one of us will have gone to the game and we'll talk about it. It's like, are they prepared? But it seems silly to ask, but it's like, man, this is a franchise that hasn't regularly sold out games for a really long time. Like, what's All-Star Week going to look like? Like, they have this beautiful new suite area set up and they're going to make, a big affair out of it. And so I'm sure it'll be absolutely fine. But it's just one of those things where you're kind of nervous, right? And you take ownership of it because you're like, well, it's my hometown team. I hope they figure it out. But I've wondered the same thing of like, man, these concession lines are pretty insane. I can't believe that.
My next question you kind of answered, so I'll modify it. Are you a fan of the universal DH?
Yes. More good hitters, please. I'm okay without pitchers batting. Totally fine with that.
You okay with LaStella and Cooper Hummel going up there?
I am not. I root for them. I root for the best careers possible, but I am not in love with how the Mariners have approached the DH position. And I find myself, I don't know if you guys do this too. Like, I find myself thinking, like, because I didn't start covering baseball, like I started with football. And so I do this kind of imposter syndrome thing where I go, what do I know? Right? Like, what do I know about baseball? But then it's like, God, the numbers from the DH position with the Mariners are so far behind everyone else. Like, that's not good, right? Less offense is not a good thing. I don't care what kind of like team building approach you're taking. You're not going to outsmart the room by not getting hits and not driving in runs with a position in your lineup. So
yeah, regardless of the sport, it's entertainment ultimately, and more points, more runs means more ratings and more tickets.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who's your favorite Mariner that you've interviewed of all time and why?
Oh, who's a great interview is Paul Sewald. We interviewed him during the lockout, and because the team obviously is not coordinating any of this, you had to reach out to players yourself, which was they're all on vacation or they're practicing or they're whatever. And I literally DM'd him on Instagram and I was like, hey, this is kind of weird, but we're hosting a show with 710 and we're wondering if you could come on. There's no baseball to talk about, but could you just explain the CBA? Like, can you explain what's happening?
And he was like, collective bargaining agreement.
Yes. We were like, can you just kind of talk about, like, from a player point of view, like, we know that this isn't going to be someone coming on representing the owner's stance. Would you come on and just talk to us about what's going on? And he was like, absolutely, would love to. And he was really flexible about timing. I think I had to like change it once. And then he joined us and he talked for, we had a good like 15-minute interview with him, just
Nice.
explaining everything that was going on financially, contract wise, all these little things. And you just tell he's really passionate about it. Like, I would not be surprised at all if he got into either like business or being a sports agent, or, you know what I mean? Like, he's just got a great mind for it.
Awesome.
Got a knack for it. Yeah.
Very cool. You're in a unique position where you're kind of a funnel for a lot of feedback, both through social media and through your radio show. Is there, I assume you got your finger on the pulse of the fans. Is there a difference with Mariner fans this year than last year?
Yes, there's more.
There's more of them. But
more.
I mean, is there expectations or excitement? What might it be?
I think so. I think that's a good thing. I think that now there are still like some classic, I don't want to say classic fans. There are still fans that have watched this organization struggle for a long time and have it almost like a, you know, like be grateful kind of attitude with it that kind of make people pause, right? So if I come in after 3 games of the season and say, you know, I'm not loving the DH position right now, you get a lot of like, oh my God, you must not watch baseball. Like,
no,
slow down.
every Sesame Street's got its snuffleupagus. We get it.
Yeah, exactly. But I do think I am sensing more fans have higher expectations. I'm sure it's either what you guys are experiencing or what your friends are, or people that you talk to, other guests that you have on your podcast, which is with higher expectations comes more emotion, right? Like, you're getting wrapped up in a series in April and May that you would never normally care about. And so of course it's going to bother you if they're no hit, or of course it's going to bother you if you know that this offense needs to be in the playoffs and they get 2 hits against a mediocre, you know, starter or whatever. Like, I think you're just seeing overwhelmingly higher expectations, and there are still some people that try to temper them, but I would say more than in the probably 3-4 years that I've been at least on air seeing the feedback, for sure.
Right on. Mike Salk's a friend of our show. Tell us the truth. He secretly roots for the Boston Red Sox. We won't tell anybody.
Yeah. One of my, I love making fun of Salk's secret ties to Boston, where he'll pretend like, I don't care. And I'll be like, you compare every Mariner to a Boston Red Sox player. Like, you'll find a way to be like, you know who this guy reminds me of? And it'll be like a miscellaneous player from like 1985. But I mean, at the same time, like, we'll tease him for it, but at the same time, like a really rich sports culture. And, you know, Salk will get, knocks from people for being out of town, but you also have someone with a point of view that is drastically different from your own experience as sports fans. I mean, obviously, not for an extended period of time, because the Patriots, only in the 2000s were like really worth watching.
Right.
They still have Boston fans that are suffering, but it is very interesting I personally like having a little bit of East Coast flavor in a West Coast market, because we are pretty chill, like, just as a culture on the West Coast. And to have someone come in and be like, where's the fire? Like, are you guys mad? Like, it's kind of like, you're right. Like, I like it. I think he adds a lot. It's great.
No, that's
Nice.
it's funny you mentioned that, because he did mention that on our show too, that sometimes he just sits there and wonders, get mad that your team hasn't been to the playoffs for 20 years,
Yes,
Like-
and, yeah, exactly.
Yep.
He'll get really upset about this is one of my favorite things. He'll get fired up about people that have like fan favorites. So like if if Mitch Haniger comes into town and people are cheering for him, he'll be like, why? He doesn't play here. But it is like, it's just a sports culture that, like, I'm from Seattle, so I'm not like dogging the town by saying this, but like sometimes we just don't get, like, we've had teams that have lost a lot.
Yeah, we put up with a lot.
We put up with a lot. We put up with a lot. And to have someone come from a market, it would be like someone coming in from the Mets or the Yankees, where it's like, we don't care who we signed. If you don't hit, we boo you. And you're third out bat. Like, it's just what happens. I find it refreshing. Is
it valid, Stacy, the West Coast attitude that there's a lot to do? Or is that an excuse? Like, the big excuse on the West Coast, why don't you sell out every, LA Clippers game? Well, there's too much to do, Is that valid, or is that just not a priority in the West Coast mentality?
I want to say somewhat valid. But I'm only ever thinking of instances from LA where it's like, well, the Lakers are fine selling out. The Dodgers have done it. So I think it's you have a really concentrated market in LA that people impose or superimposes like all of the West Coast. In Seattle, what are you doing? What are you going to Green Lake Park? Like, no, that's not what it is. The problem is you didn't make the playoffs for 20 years.
Yeah, but I mean, the Sonics end days, people stopped going.
Totally right.
Yep. Like I was at a Sounders game the other day. It's gonna have the amount of people it's gonna have. That might be a different thing. I went to a Krakens game and like now they're winning. It's good. At the end of last year, I went to a couple games. Like it's all Detroit Red Wings fans, you know.
Right.
I don't know. It's an interesting thing because it's, in my opinion, there's other places. You can't tell me like in New York there aren't other things to do. Of course, there's other things to do.
Right.
Like,
it's one thing if you're like, hey, in Mobile, Alabama, roll Tide, and you're like, for sure, I get it. But you're right. Like you're telling me that like in the biggest city in the country, one of the biggest cities in the world, that like, oh, all we do is there's just nothing to do except for go to a Yankees game. I think part of it. What do you guys think about part of it being cultural differences with how sports are embraced? I think that's part of it. I think that another part of it might be like just demeanor. Like people are a little more laid back in the Pacific Northwest and on the West Coast. And people on the East Coast, and this is a generalization that's not fair, are pretty passionate, and that carries over whether it's sports or not.
Yeah, I've never been able to put my finger on it. I think maybe the three of us who are from here, grew up here, maybe it's a little bit different. Maybe there's a transient nature to West Coast. You know, people come from other places. I think it's tough. I've never been able to figure it out.
It's very weird.
Anyway, let's if we could we move to the Seahawks? And I want to ask you the biggie. This is the big question. Stacy, did you think bringing back Geno for the contract that it was at? Had you imagined that was going to happen?
No, I thought they'd have to pay him more for sure, 1,000%. Like I thought that it would just be. I didn't think he'd be out here getting $40 million, but I thought for sure that they would not get what I consider to be a team-friendly deal that allows them to essentially move on after a year if they need to. I did not see that deal working out, and it did. Thank goodness for them.
I got to ask, as a Coug, I need your expert evaluation on right tackle Abraham Lucas, year one.
Forget all the other questions. This was the primary
of the
show today.
I thought he was fantastic. I mean, God, what a class. I'm curious to see if you guys are easily their best draft class since 2012. And it's not particularly close. Like they've found stars. Tyler Lockett in 2015, Frank Clark no longer with this team, but he was never a Pro Bowler with them, which he probably should have been. Obviously you have DK Metcalf in 2019. Like they found in Michael Dixon. Okay, they found individual players, but they have not had a class where you look at a couple guys and go, you got starters and you got long-term starters and you potentially got some Pro Bowlers. Potentially there's an all-pro in there. This hasn't happened for 10 years. So it's it was a marvelous class. I will say about Abe Lucas, credit to him. Bump was as a Coug also all about mentioning every time Abe Lucas would hit the field during training camp. So we'd be broadcasting live and our show starts like 15 minutes before warm-ups start. So we get to see the first players out there. Abe Lucas, if he wasn't the first player, was like the second player on the field. So Bump would always just go Cougs, here's Abe Lucas. And then he'd like continue on with whatever conversation we were having. Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. Super shocked that he fell that far. Question for you about the offseason acquisitions. Not only was that an amazing draft, I think they did a good job. We were talking to Jen Mueller a couple weeks ago, and she was raving about this free agency, these free agency pickups. I wanted to get your temperature on this.
I love it. I thought they had a great free agency. Now this is the way I described it to Bump on our show, which was like, if they had unlimited funds, I would give them a C because you need a better center and you need a starting nose tackle, but they don't. And with the salary cap space they had, I think they made some great additions. You went out and got Dre Jones, a player that Denver, despite what their fans will say, certainly wanted to keep and didn't. And you haven't had a player like that on your defensive line for quite some time. You brought back, first of all, you brought back Wagner and also got 2 starting inside linebackers after having none. Like, that was a huge need for you.
Yep.
Analysts that I really respect, like Mina Kimes, love Julian Love, which means I love Julian Love, and I'm going to blindly be like, whatever you think. Like, I'm not the best. I'm not great at evaluating safety play and sometimes interior offensive line play. So I just like, what is someone I trust think? And then we'll see how it pans out. But he's a favorite for, I feel like, a lot of analytically minded folks that I really, really admire their work. And so I'm very excited to see what he brings to the table. I mean, bring back Jaron Reed, even, like, he was solid with Green Bay. He had a better year than he did in his time with Kansas City. I think that, you know, in a perfect year, you'd have a better center. Like, once again, this is a team that is trying to find its center after like a story every offseason, right? And I would imagine that they try to bring Puna or Al in on a cheaper deal and maybe try to get something done there. I do think they really like those guys. Actually, did Al sign elsewhere? I can't remember.
Not yet, from what I heard.
Yeah. But I loved what they did in free agency. And to me, I'm curious to see what you guys think. Maybe the most encouraging thing wasn't one particular signing. It was that they had a problem that they fixed, right? One of the most frustrating things about this team, when they unfortunately were in a bit of a salary cap bind, was they would enter an offseason knowing, well, we were 25th against the pass. Can't do anything about it. Like, maybe we draft some guy in the 5th round and see if that helps out. But they weren't going to, you know, send away half their defense. They got rid of the whole defensive line. they entered the offseason and they were like, wow, this was horrible. See you guys later. Much love, but you got to go. And that is bold. Like, that is, because those guys are well liked. Like Shelby Harris, well liked, like really friendly guy. Gabe Jackson, well liked. I know he's on the offensive side, but I thought that they approached the offseason in decision-making mode and made some tough ones, and I loved it.
I'll let you respond to that first, Brian. What did you think about the defensive additions?
Long story short, I loved it. I loved Mr. Love from, was it the New York Giants? I thought that, I think that was a great trade. I mean, the guy was a captain at the age of 24, and I think he's just going to come in and make waves. And also the gentleman from Denver, I thought was a great pickup. I mean, I think he's on social media earlier in the week, or I don't remember the day it was, but he was commenting on how the Seahawks wanted him last year in the Russell Wilson deal, but Denver was not willing to give him up. And he if he could turn back the clock, he would have jumped ship last year, but they just didn't want to give him up. They great moves by far.
Yeah.
I'll let you ask your next question here in a second, Brian, but my response to that is from a perspective of watching Cody and Cody Barton and Tanner Muse and Jordan Brooks, just watching them get run over, you know, every game and just constantly getting Devin Bush, getting Bobby Wagner, addition by subtraction, Tanner Muse out, Cody Barton out. Let's try something different. Yeah, and that's all I can think of, because I just can't, in the NFL, actually at any level of football, if somebody runs up the middle and they can get 8-9 yards per play, like we saw from a lot of teams, can't handle that. It's like, can you please stop at least that one thing? We just couldn't.
Well, no, they just weren't. I talked to a lot of a lot of people who know the team well, and particularly people who know the team well who played. And I was always like, what's the deal? Like, a switch to a 3-4, you hear the coaching staff say it's just not that big of a deal. But then you look out on the field and you think, this is ugly. Like, this is ugly football. They're getting gashed regularly. Is that a 3-4? And the way it was always explained to me was like, not necessarily. What it is that, like, they can switch to a 3-4 and they have some of the guys, but like the important guys, the guys up front, it was like basically Al Woods. And he's the only one that really fit the mold. And they just they didn't have like big, strong, stout bodies. And sometimes football's as simple as that. It's like, do you have the big, strong guys up front? Like at the end of the day, right? Like that's part of what it is. Like, can you bulldoze over someone or stop someone from bulldozing over you? And they just didn't have those guys. And
no, that's the way I felt.
Yeah.
That's the way I felt.
Yeah.
I was a good rebounder at Christ the King in 8th grade. But
Okay, stop bragging.
but I got to play in Chetton. I got to play in Chetton high school, and I'm like a foot shorter than the guards. So it's like, no.
Yeah, big difference for sure.
I'm just gonna get bulldozed.
It's not easy.
So I got to ask Stacy, do we say goodbye or say arrivederci to Jamal Adams after June 1st and hope we can re-sign him to a salary cap? I mean, something that we can accommodate, or what are your thoughts?
I would be shocked if Jamal Adams, as someone who was a number 6 pick, and I don't mean this as an insult, seemingly a prideful person, would do that. Like, I think if you move on from Jamal Adams is out of here. I mean, who knows what kind of interest he'll get from other teams. I would love to see and still wanted to see and still want to see Jamal Adams in the defense that Clint Hurt was envisioning. And I think that there is a big part of his game that he still has. We'll see about the quad injury. Like, that's a really tough one. There could be some bursts missing, but we'll see. Yeah. In theory, there's a big part of his game that this defensive staff was really excited about that we never got to see. And I think that because of the lack of availability he's had, it's really easy and understandable for fans to be like, I'm done. Like, I just get rid of it. Like, I'm moving on from the trade. Let's just call it. When it's like, well, wait a minute. Like, there could still be something here. And I will say, when he was acquired, I wasn't out at camp because I think there were still COVID precautions and our show was during the day for whatever reason. We couldn't broadcast there. And but there were reporters who I spoke with who were out there, and you had like Michael Shandugar of The Athletic and a couple other guys who would watch him, and they'd be like, tweeting and writing about it, and they'd be like, when you see a number 6 overall pick, he looks like it. Like, if you see a number 4 overall pick, for the most part, he looks like it. Like, it is a different kind of athleticism. If that's still there, I would like to see them hang on and just, maybe you restructure or something, free up, turn a bit into a signing bonus and try to free up something. But I would feel like it was unfinished business to move on when there's still potentially something there.
Well said.
Right on.
Yeah.
That actually kind of answers my question. So I'm just going to move to a different one. The approach that Pete and John Snyder took last year was almost a mindset of, we're not rebuilding, we're champions.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's this way this year. Have you seen this like on any other team?
No.
In recent memory? I mean, like, I'm sure there's others, but I mean, I was wrong last year.
Oh yeah,
which is rare for Abraham.
To admit or to be wrong?
To admit being wrong, yeah. But no, I'm very curious if, in the throes of what 99.99% of people said last year, as you were watching it, because you were there in the media room, did you get a sense that they're like, we ain't giving up? Or was it just lucky? Was this all luck last year?
I don't think it was luck, but I will say it took a long time to believe it, because I will tell you, they didn't look good in training camp. Like, I will be very honest. I'm not going to just say this to be like, I was right and everyone was right in thinking that they wouldn't be good. Like, there were times I'd be talking to other reporters, and I'll never forget one reporter turned to me and goes, well, they're going to need offense. They're going to need to figure it out. Like, there were reporters who, and I mean, I'm saying this not in really smart people who know this team well, or pragmatic, don't have a rooting investment, who were like, I don't know why Gino is starting over Drew and getting the ones, because Drew doesn't look that much better at all. It's just that neither of them look great. Like, it was fine. There was nothing about the team defensively or otherwise that stood out, with the exception of Tariq Woolen being very fast and much bigger than everyone. Like, that was the only thing that stood out, was like Tariq Woolen catching your eye from 40 yards away, being like, who's that guy? That was it, truly. And even then I thought Tariq Woolen would not be a starter. So like, there was nothing good to take from it. And then you hear about confidence that people had within the building, and months and months and months later, I was talking with someone who is part of, he works with the team. He's not like in the front office or anything, but he attends indoor practices, and the ones he doesn't, he hears from people. And they were like, there was a lot of confidence building with what they saw internally. Like there wasn't a huge difference with what they were rolling out in front of fans for training camp practices. But when they were trying to dive into the playbook in the private practices, it was clear that like Gino's got this. Like he's got a handle on this, and he can be really good. And we aren't privy to that, and we don't see it. And so I wonder sometimes if those indoor practices, closed practices, things like that are what gave players and coaches a lot of confidence, because it didn't seem fake. Like when you interviewed them in training camp or in September, early in the season, like it didn't seem like coach speak from Carroll. I think he wholeheartedly believed it, truly. And I remember thinking like, what does he see that am I an idiot? Do I not get it? And the answer is yes.
Yes, we all are.
We're all stupid. But I think that there is a large portion of particularly the offense that reporters did not see until the season got underway.
Were you sad to see Rashad Penny leave in the offseason?
I so badly, I remember rooting for CJ Procise for some reason. He was just such a nice kid and like kind of unassuming and quiet, and like you kind of rooted for him because you could tell his confidence was kind of low, not in a bad way, but in a way where he wants to play and can't. Penny wasn't to that extent. Like you can tell he's like, kind of building that confidence. But God, if you weren't intrigued by what you saw in the final couple weeks of that season, like it was him and Jonathan Taylor, like running away with it. And in terms of pretty much every rushing category, whether it was yards per carry, yards after contact, broken tackles, like everything. And you finally thought, God, the Seahawks must feel so validated. They must be like, yeah. If he doesn't have that stretch of 5-6 weeks, he's a bust. Because he has it, and you never gave him a huge veteran contract. It's just kind of like break even. But I think he's going to have a good year with Philly. I really do.
Very cool.
Nice.
Stacy, you wrote on your website that you don't think the Seahawks should trade down from 5.
Yeah, I'm demanding.
You demanded. Why do you demand that?
I demanded very cool. Look, I watch a lot of reality TV, and I refuse to not be entertained. Like I refuse to have a boring day one of the draft. No, there is an argument to be made for trading back, particularly if they do not love this conversation they're going to have on Tuesday with Jalen Carter, right? If Davis is gone, or maybe you just aren't swooning over him, and you think you can get Wilson a bit later, and you don't love Carter, fine. Like, why take someone at 5 when you can get them at 7 or whatever, swapping with the Raiders? But they just don't need to. Like, they don't. Like, there was a pregame interview that John Schneider did with Jen Mueller, friend of your guys' show, friend of mine, amazing. And she said, hey, how does it feel knowing that so much of what the NFC West has been able to do, the way that these teams have been able to evolve, is specifically in response to the team that you guys built back in 2011 and 12. And in his answer, he almost said, yeah, but it sucks because we don't have the stuff to work with too. Like part of what he said was equally impressive as like them, flattering as them trying to find ways to stop you, is remaining competitive without the picks that they've had. Because San Francisco was 4th for 4 years or whatever. And the Arizona Cardinals have had a chance to get a quarterback in the top 10 in 2 consecutive years, including number 1 overall. You've had the Rams that did have, a top pick, and then were comfortable trading theirs away, and also managed to hang on to talent like Aaron Donald. Yeah, he's not a pick they made in 2015 or whatever. God, I forget when he was drafted, but he was still a top 10, I think 11 or so pick. And so Schneider was pointing to like, we haven't had that. Like the highest pick that they had prior to Charles Cross was number 12. They traded back to 15 to get Bruce Irvin. That's it. Like that's the highest.
Right.
And so I think that he was very openly kind of lamenting, like, don't overlook that we haven't had these picks. You can't do that if you're going to trade back. Like if you're going to trade out of it, that was your congrats. That was your last time complaining about it. Like you don't get to talk about it anymore. So I'd love to see them exercise the pick because they have 10. They don't need to add more. They can, but like, I would just love to see the kind of talent you can get at 5 on this team for the first time in a really long time.
Right on. Hopefully you get this reference, and I'm not spoiling it, but my last question is, Pete Carroll and John Schneider seem to go together like Bo and Luke Duke on the Dukes of Hazzard.
Yeah.
How much longer do we see them together like this until they go into retirement and we see them on reruns on the NFL Network?
Oh God, good question. I don't know. I don't know why I wonder if this is Carroll's last contract. It's unfair, but part of it is age, and I think he would probably call me out on that if he were to hear it. But
I'm sure.
you know, there's a reality to wondering, like, do you want to rebuild? Like,
Yeah.
I think that that's when you look at some of the decisions they made, whether it's you know, keeping Geno could be one where it's like, I don't think they're in a hurry to start from scratch here. I think Schneider is probably even more open to taking a quarterback because it's like, well, wait a minute, like I'm not going anywhere. Like I'm interested in staying here a couple of years, but right now, if I had to guess, I would say the remainder of Carroll's contract, and then it's John's show.
Right on.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
We're running up against the clock here. Stacy, it's been amazing having you on the show. Question, can you put out there for people where they can find you, both on your radio show and any social media?
Yeah, so you can listen to Michael Bumpus and me. It's called Bump and Stacy from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Pacific on 710 a.m. Seattle Sports. You can also follow me at Stacy Rost, R-O-S-T, like Frost, no F.
And is it Stacy Jo or is it just Stacy?
Stacy Jo's good.
Okay.
It's Stacy Jo with family and friends.
Awesome. Right. And definitely, by the way, check out, I know you write the occasional article as well on My Sports Northwest.
Yes, I think we've changed it to seattlesports.com now. Either one works, but seattlesports.com should work.
Oh, that's right. You guys got jealous of our name, and so no, I'm just kidding.
Yep.
But
that was right after the Sock interview too.
That's exactly what it was.
We poked at Sock about that as well. But the way we always end this show is on a positive note. You know, just a quick little uptick, and these are our shout outs. And I'll start with you, Brian. Go ahead and give your shout out, please.
All right. I have a different one this week for you. I'll save you the details, but I had a pretty scary moment yesterday on Easter. So I just want to give a shout out to God and to my family and my wonderful wife for looking out for me and taking care of me. And just want to say, I love you.
Awesome. And my shout out this week is for a YouTuber named Golden Blue Dude. He's a West Virginia fan, but he talks a lot of college sports. He just passed away a week ago today, and always had he had a great vibe. He was always positive. He always had great insights and responded to everybody's messages. RIP Golden Blue Dude. Stacy, over to you.
I'm going to shout out, I don't even know his name. We had a random listener who texted in and said, that he was driving in the car with his daughter, and she is getting more into sports hearing a woman, and it really was touching and totally made my whole month / year.
That's awesome.
Well, that's awesome.
Very cool.
Very cool to hear.
Yes.
Inspiring people is always fantastic.
Yes.
And hopefully we can inspire you guys to check us out on YouTube with our podcast here, as well as Captivate FM, Spotify, iTunes. And check us out on social media at Seattle Sports U on Twitter, as well as Facebook. Like us, subscribe to us, and say hi to us. And we'll see you guys next week. On behalf of the Soulman, Brian Solack, myself, Abraham DeWeese, we thank our guest, Stacy Jo Rost, for being on the show today. And we'll see you guys next time.